London's Royal Borough of Greenwich is, well, it's pretty damn royal. It certainly lives up to its title anyway. It sits on a seemingly ordinary bend of the Thames. It turns out it's anything but. It's soaked in a turbulent history and full of breathtaking artwork and stunning architecture. So join me while I explore one of the most fascinating parts of this river. This is my favourite view of Greenwich, and it is also said to be Sir Christopher Wren's favourite view of Greenwich, which is hardly surprising when you think about the fact that he had an influence over pretty much everything that you see here.
Well, someone was full of themselves.
In case anyone is unaware who Sir Christopher Wren actually was, he was an architect, scientist, polymath, an obvious passionate haircut enthusiast, and founder of the Royal Society. But more on him later.
When you arrive in Greenwich, the first thing that you will probably see is this giant boat that you see behind me, for obvious reasons. And the second thing that you will almost certainly notice is the fact that it's not in the water, where we tend to find boats. Shockingly, it hasn't always been here. It actually started its life as trees in Scotland. But not like magic trees that you see in Lord of the Rings.
In fact, it started its journey from forest to boat back in 1869. It was built by a man named John Jock Willis. How cool is that name? Although based on the sheer size of this boat, he almost certainly had some help. He was keen to crack the ever-expanding tea trade. He made the perfectly rational decision to fund it himself, even though he wasn't especially rich, so he inevitably ran out of cash. Fortunately, it was eventually completed by a group of creditors who saw its potential.
And it's a really good job that they did, because not only do we get to enjoy this national treasure today, but once upon a time, this was the fastest boat to ever hit the high seas. Well, until steam engines were invented a couple of years later, and then it lost that title. But it was at that point that the Cutty Sark turned its attention to the Australian wool industry for some reason.
After a long and fascinating career, it eventually retired in Greenwich back in 1938. Today, it draws in tourists from across the globe who come here to marvel at its nautical wonders just metres from the sea. Its days of delivering wool is officially over, but the way it's been lovingly restored has ensured its legacy remains timeless. Our next stop is the magnificent estate of the Royal Naval College. It makes me feel more regal just walking in. It was the birthplace of the serial wife slayer King Henry VIII and his two adorable daughters, Mary I and Elizabeth I. What a legacy they've left!
You know, there's a question that I would love to have answered, and it's not been asked in any history book that I've ever read. And it's, how did Henry keep convincing women to marry him? I mean, he must have been one charming guy, right? Because imagine at wife number 5, and you've had the previous lot all decapitated. Presumably, she would be aware of this, and he still managed to talk her into it. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in that conversation.
Despite its importance, the palace actually fell into disrepair and was used to house prisoners of war. It was eventually demolished, but in 1694, Queen Mary II wanted to use the area to build a charitable institution for naval veterans. And guess who was commissioned to survey it? You guessed it, Christopher Wren. But he was busy designing 50-something churches that were burnt down during the Great Fire of London. Most of the actual work was done by his talented assistant Nicholas Hawksmoor. 331 years later, I have to say he didn't do a bad job at all. But it did more than just look good. It was also a royal hospital, but in reality it served more of a retirement home for seamen. No sniggering in the back there. Actual seamen, not the other kind. This place came with every amenity that you would need during those times. It even has its own royal chapel. It was originally designed by the English architect Thomas Ripley for the veterans to have their daily prayers in. Unfortunately, that one was burnt to the ground in a massive fire. It was eventually rebuilt by neoclassical artist James Stewart, and he decided to give it a nautical theme to make the sailors feel more at home, presumably. Now, if that's not considerate, I don't know what is. Just across the road is the even more extraordinary Painted Halls, now understandably a UNESCO World Heritage Site. However, it was originally used as a dining hall for the pensioners. That's right, a dining hall. I think I want words with my old school board. All I got was a poster with a food pyramid on it. It's painted from floor to ceiling in incredibly intricate artwork. And astonishingly, that was painted by just one man. One man did all of this. That man was Sir James Thornhill, an English painter who loved the Italian Baroque style. I say Baroque like I know what that is, but I had to look it up. According to Merriam-Webster, the word originates from France and it's used to describe something that is irregularly shaped. It later became a word to describe an extravagant form of art that involved curved lines, gilt and gold. It became prominent in the 17th and 18th century. That is certainly evident here. Sir James Thornhill was paid the seemingly meagre sum of just £1 per square yard for this masterpiece and £3 per square yard for the ceiling. That equated to just £6,685. That doesn't sound so good. But adjusted to inflation, now that money isn't worth very much, that equates to around £1.4 million. Not bad. And he was also the first artist in history to receive a knighthood, and that was given to him by George I, and quite rightly so in my opinion. The building contains more than 200 images depicting political change, scientific study and cultural achievements. He even managed to paint himself in there. I'm not sure if this was a first attempt of Where's Wally. That's him in the corner, hiding behind that pillar. The Painted Halls have become known affectionately as England's Sistine Chapel. That seems fair to me if I'm honest. It's also the final resting place of Lord Nelson. People come here to pay respects to this great English hero. Also, there is an annual celebration to his memory. Just across the road is the ever-impressive Queen's House. When Sir Christopher Wren took the job to design the Naval College, for absolutely no money may I add, he had a free hand on what it was going to look like, aside from one thing. Queen Mary II had just one very specific yet unnegotiable condition. The building could not obstruct the views of the Thames from the Queen's house. And to this day, it does not. The story of this place is an interesting one. The manor was originally gifted by King James I to his wife Queen Anne of Denmark after she reportedly shot and killed his favourite dog in a hunting accident. And I have to admit, probably be a bit upset myself being a dog person. This elegant little white palace is at the very cutting edge of architectural design. Well, it was when it was built in the 1630s at least. The architect who was originally commissioned to design it was called Inigo Jones. But this palace was to have a second function. So the idea was to build this grand portal that marked the end of the road between Dover and London. And it ran between Greenwich Park and the Thames. And these colonnades actually mark the original end of the road. And it was to give this wow factor, as if to say, welcome to London. And I really think it does it because it's amazing here. But the Queen was not to live in her palace for very long, as she died of tuberculosis soon after, and the place was left half built. It wasn't until 1629, when James I gifted it to his wife, that the work resumed. You can't help but notice that Greenwich Palace is a really popular gift idea. I'm not going to mention this to my wife because she lets me off with just a bunch of flowers and a box of chocolates every so often. I'm getting off lightly. This stays between us. The Queen's house was eventually completed in all of its majesty and grandeur that you see today. They're still here for us to enjoy. It's become apparent to me that things were really built to last way back then.
But she didn't have very long to enjoy it either. She had to flee to France because civil war had broken out and her husband had had his head cut off. And that made it tricky for him to run a country.
While today it's no longer used as a royal residence, it is and forever will be the crowning jewel of Greenwich and well worth your time to visit. Just through the park is yet another of Sir Christopher Wren's masterpieces, and perhaps the finest around here. It's the Royal Observatory. He suggested it be built over the ruins of Greenwich Castle as it already had strong foundations to work with. Well, he would do, being an all-around smart-ass. It was also at a lofty location, well, lofty for London anyway, and the hope was that you would get an uninterrupted view of the skies.
Despite this being the biggest telescope in the world at the time, money doesn't change geography, and London was entirely the wrong place for a decent view of the heavens. However, many significant discoveries were made here, such as Edmund Halley finding his own comet. He probably left it around here somewhere. Also, to note, this place was built in a rush.
When I say it was built in a rush, I really mean it. According to records, at 3:14 p.m. on the 10th of August 1675, the first Astronomer Royal, John Flamsteed, laid the first foundational stones of the new Royal Observatory. He then moved in less than a year later with his two servants. John Flamsteed was appointed the first Astronomer Royal by King Charles II. He worked here in the Tower of London, meticulously mapping the night skies above England. However, the legend goes that he complained that the ravens at the tower were messing with his equipment. How a raven could do that without, say, pooping on it is absolutely beyond me, but the story goes he requested that they be removed. But, as another legend says, the kingdom would fall if the ravens ever left the tower, so Charles decided to move the observatory instead. Like pretty much most legends based on absolutely no historical evidence whatsoever, the legend still persists to this day.
But it's more than just an observatory. You see, it was here that time itself, as we know it, was invented. And I mean that literally.
Before then, clocks didn't look like this. In fact, there was no standardised version of time at all, and almost every town had its own idea of what time it actually was. That would have been mind-bendingly complicated. And because of the rapid expansion of railways and communications during the Industrial Revolution, there was an ever-growing need for standardisation.
And that standardisation came in 1884, when the representatives of 25 countries met in Washington, D.C. And it was decided that this place was going to be the spot that marked 0 degrees longitude. And what that meant is, this is the place where the East and Western hemispheres divided. And it also means that it was this place where the whole world's time, to this day, is set from. I think that's pretty incredible myself.
This was good for progress for sure. Things were less confusing now. But for me, there was a definite downside.
This standardisation of time has had far-reaching consequences for us because it's disrupted our relationship with the night sky. I mean, if you said to me, Gary, when is the summer solstice? And you took away Google and all the rest of the clocks there are in the world, I think you'd see Jesus return before I was able to give you an accurate answer. And that's a shame, because these celestial cycles have been intricate to our nature for so long. And now, it's all gone.
My personal and somewhat philosophical viewpoints aside, the Royal Observatory has to be one of England's most significant scientific research centres. And it doesn't make for a bad day out either. Also to note,
the first symbol of time here in the UK, for what it was worth. It wasn't your Apple Watch, it wasn't Big Ben, it wasn't even morning television. It was this ball at the top of this building.
Every day at 12:55, the ball hoisted itself up the mast to let boats know they should prepare to do boat stuff. And at 1300, it went down again, a sort of on your marks, get set, go sort of routine. Today we just watch it go up and down since no one needs this service anymore. But it still does, and that's quite cool. Our final stop is the fabulous little Greenwich Market. Now, Greenwich has been a magnet for trade for centuries, but it used to be just a ramshackle of stalls that had slowly been evolving since the 14th century. Back then, this market consisted of predominantly butchers for some reason. I'm not sure who needed that much meat. There was also a hatter and a baker, presumably for diversity quotas, but the problem was it was dark and it was dangerous and incredibly hard to police. But the town's seemingly never-ending growth demanded structure, and that structure came on the 3rd of September 1737 with the opening of the Royal Charter Market near the west gate of the Royal Naval College. Today, no one really shops at greengrocers and butchers, as we all prefer to buy our products from under just one roof. So like most markets, it's had to totally reinvent itself. Today, it's one of the best places in London to grab a bit of street food. It is also a purveyor of antiques, arts and crafts and other random things that you didn't know you need. If you like this sort of thing, this is the perfect place to finish your day. I think it was only fair that Greenwich got its own episode because it deserved it. It's one hell of a place, and I really wanted to emphasise its beauty and its importance, and I hope I did that. And if you like my stuff, you know what to do, like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.